So I'm really pleased to introduce Dr. John Bargh. He's a professor of psychology at Yale University. He's been doing research in this field for over 25 years, well, much longer than that even, with a focus on the unconscious. He's distilled key findings from his research in the field in general into the book that he's here to talk about today. Before You Know It, The Unconscious Reasons We Do What We Do. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you, David. Thank you all for coming. I know you have an option during your lunch hour, and you don't have to be here, so I appreciate it. So the book is not about the Freudian unconscious. It's about the last 30 or 40 years of actual systematic scientific research on average normal people, randomly assigned to conditions, not case studies of mentally ill people, from which Freud generated his entire theory. It's also, we'll see the talk is sort of structured this way, but it's only 30 minutes, and I'm actually, if you'd like, I'll try to speed it up and make it shorter than that. It's also not a, what we found is that logically you probably would figure this out. It's not a separate mind. The unconscious is not some kind of separate part of the brain with its own rules and with its own operating system, and it's locked away and you can't see it. You probably remember that movie Inside Out with the little emotions running the control room, that animation movie? One of the little emotions did something wrong. It got thrown into this unconscious cave and the door was locked and he never saw them again. Never heard from them again. And that's not what we're talking about. It's a very different kind of thing. It's one brain. The research showing effects of increasing or decreasing incentives during tasks, this is out of University College London, shows that the same brain regions are used, become active in either case. When a motivational state is a conscious one or it's an unconscious one, it's the same brain region, and that's pretty much true of everything. Whatever the kind of thing you're looking at, emotion, motivation, language, behavior, it's the same part of the brain that's operating, and whether it's in conscious or unconscious mode. But it's a single unified brain. It's basically the unconscious influences are generally helpful. They survive natural selection. They survive evolution. They're not some kind of destructive, evil twin lurking inside your skull. So that's the difference between what a lot of people hear and the word unconscious, and that's what they think of course. Well, there's a disconnect, though, and this is why I'm organized the book, but also organized this talk today in terms of the past, present, and future, because we're focused almost always on the present. We're focused on what's around, what's going on in front of us, what we're aware of, right? What else could we be aware of but what we're aware of? And so we understand the reasons for how we feel and our decisions and so forth based on what's available to us right now in front of us. The mind is on all three time zones at the same time. You've got influences from the evolutionary past, very strong ones. You've got influences from your early childhood you have no memory for anymore, from your first 3 or 4 years of life that carry over the rest of your life. Influences of your recent past, which just happened, that carry over. Like for my case, for a long time, my work life would just segue right into my home life and carry over to my understanding of what was going on at home, which was wrong. But also your future, your motivations, your goals, your aspirations, things you're trying to attain, whether it's a long-term life goal, have a family, have a successful career, be happy, that kind of thing, or even just, I got to get something done tomorrow. Your mind is often in the future, and your goals and motives influence how you see the present. In other words, what's good for your goal is what's good for you, and you like and dislike things as a function of whether they're good for your current goal, which can be a disconnect from your long-term values and your long-term beliefs, and I'll show you some examples of that. So that's how it's organized, and we'll jump right in to the distant past, evolutionary past. And these basic needs, these very important needs that we have and motivations we have, so basic: to be safe, to survive, not to die, to avoid disease, to avoid germs, protect ourselves against disease, and of course reproduction and mating, sex, and cooperation. These are the basic ones, but they're the basic physical motivations that we have, and yet, as you'll see, they're influencing a lot more than that. So for example, this is topical because this is October. It seems like every October we're told to get out, go out and get a flu shot. There's this horrible new strain of flu virus out there that's a killer and very dangerous. Can't read this very well. I'll tell you the study, though. There's a metaphor that's being used in our country, and it's actually a metaphor that's been used in the past by arch-conservative leaders in the past, that is tapping into this very strong motivation that we have without realizing it. That immigrants into a country are like viruses into a body, like germs into a physical body or bacteria into a body. We need to protect ourselves and be safe from these germs and bacteria. We have to expel them and get rid of them if they're in our body already. We have to build walls or build structures to keep them out, protect ourselves from the invasion of these germs and bacteria into our body. And so if you think about immigration that way, you can see there's a strong connection between the metaphor or analogy of immigration into a country and germs or bacteria or viruses into a body. Not said explicitly, although people and arch-conservative leaders in the past have said that explicitly about despised minority groups in their society. And it was an excuse or a justification for eradication of those groups. Well, what do? At this time of year, a few years ago, we reminded the people in our study of the flu virus and the threat of the flu. And then we had them complete an attitude survey about immigration, attitudes towards immigration. After that, we asked them, and after they'd already completed that survey, whether they'd had a flu shot or not. So the people who we raised this threat but already knew they had a flu shot felt safe. Because here's the threat, but they've already taken steps to protect themselves against it. They should feel safe from the flu virus. It turns out they had more positive than average attitudes towards immigration because we raised the flu threat. But for the people we raised the flu threat to, but had not had the flu shot, their attitudes towards immigration became significantly more negative. They were more against immigration compared to a control group. So we're moving around their attitudes towards immigration by raising and lowering the threat of the flu virus, which is that connection I'm talking about. And there's more. There's a long-standing lot of research showing that conservative people with conservative ideologies or conservative attitudes are generally more concerned with physical threat and physical safety than other people are. A lot of research on that. For example, the size of the human amygdala, which is the part of the brain that reacts to fear and strong emotions, is actually larger in conservatives than in liberals. Brain imaging studies have shown that. 4-year-olds who are more fearful tend to have more conservative attitudes at age 23. That's a study out of Berkeley. So there's lots of studies on this. And in general, given this, there's been an easy trick that political psychologists have used in the past, that you can turn a liberal into a conservative, basically by threatening them, making them feel afraid. They then have more conservative attitudes. And remember Franklin Delano Roosevelt saying, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." And former President Obama talks a lot these days against the politics of fear, because fear makes people more conservative. Well, people have always have been very successful at turning liberals into conservatives, but no one has ever turned a conservative into a liberal until we did that by, as you probably could figure out how, having them feel physically safe. We had them imagine that they were given a superpower by a genie, and it was a rich imagination exercise, and they really are trying to really imagine this happening. In the control condition, the superpower they were given was to be able to fly. That's actually the most popular superpower people want of all the ones that are possible. That's a control condition. The others were given the superpower of being invulnerable to physical harm, like Superman. Bullets would bounce off you. If you fell, nothing would happen. Nothing would cut you. Those kinds of things, and they imagined that. And then we looked at their attitudes on standard social issues that classically define and divide conservatives and liberals, like same-sex marriage, marijuana legalization, and so forth, the ones that are the standard ones where you get the difference. And you see on the left, the flying condition, you get the standard difference. Conservatives are more conservative than liberal. But the fly thing didn't matter at all as a superpower, but the people who were made to feel invulnerable to harm, the conservatives move much more close to liberal attitudes as a result of feeling physically safe temporarily. Another study on the actual defining quality of being conservative, which is resistance to social change. That's what FDR was talking about in that speech about fear and fear itself. He was talking about the New Deal. That wasn't about World War II. That was 1933, his first State of the Union address during the Depression. On that issue, you actually cause conservatives and liberals to be identical. If anything, then you've taken conservatives and turned them into liberals by at least temporarily making them feel totally physically safe. Just like you can take liberals and make them more conservative in their attitudes by making them feel afraid. So these deep underlying evolved needs bubble up to influence, abstract social attitudes and political attitudes that you think are just the product of reasoning and some reasoned position. But you can raise or lower those conservative liberal attitudes on the top of the boiling water by the underlying flame underneath of feeling physically safe or feeling physically afraid. Another one, there's been a lot of research on this one, physical warmth and coldness, over the last 10 years or so. We did a study 10 years ago in Science, published in Science, where essentially we gave everybody the same, at Yale and other places, the same description of a person to read, and they formed an impression whether they liked the person or not. We gave everybody the same one. But for some of them, while they were coming into the experiment, actually in the elevator coming up to the lab, we had a lot of papers, like the questionnaire they were supposed to fill out. And we had in our hand, oh, here we even have one, a cup of either iced coffee or hot coffee, iced coffee or warm coffee. This is the iced coffee condition. We said, could you, hold that for me for a second, so I can get your papers for you? And they held it, and here's the papers, and they took it right back. So it was a matter of 2 or 3 seconds they might have held the warm or the hot, or the iced coffee. If they held the warm coffee, they formed a significantly more positive impression of the person they read about. If they had held the iced coffee, significantly more negative impression of the person they read about. Remember, everybody read about the same person. So feeling physically warm or cold actually changed their feeling of a person being socially warm or socially cold. And since then, last 10 years, there's been a lot of neuroscience on this, mainly at UCLA, where they show the same little part of the human insula, which is a walnut-shaped part of the brain in the middle of the brain. The same little part becomes active when you hold something warm and when you're texting your family and friends, and when you're thinking about the people close to you. And also the same little part becomes active when you hold something cold and when you're thinking about people who have betrayed you or who are your enemies. They're connected, they're wired together. There's a channel between feeling physical warmth and feeling trust and positive things towards other people. And the same kind of channel, conversely, with feeling physically cold. Get back to that in a second. Much more other research has been showing that a person's actual body temperature goes up and down along with their feelings of how close they feel to their family and friends. So people in a hospital, their temperature is taken, oral temperature, every hour for 6 hours. And they also ask them how close they feel to the close ones in their life, and it tracks. Their body temperature raises and lowers. When people are rejected in some way in a little game, when people don't throw the ball to you anymore in some computer game, the avatars are tossing the ball around, but they stop throwing it to you, you feel a little rejected, your body temperature actually decreases about 0.4 Fahrenheit of a degree. You're actually feeling physically, your body's actually physically colder after a socially cold experience. There's another kind of past, maybe even more opaque to us, because the things that happen to us in the first 3-4 years of life, we don't have much memory for. A lot of things happened to us back then as infants. This is my daughter, who's now 11, but when she was 1, 2, 3 years old, she was a huge fan of the movie Cars, and she loved Lightning McQueen, and she drove around the house in a little lightning car, sat in a lightning chair, had a lightning blanket, and we watched that movie together 50 or 60 times. At least 50 or 60 times. She was obsessed with Lightning McQueen. Thought Lightning McQueen lived nearby in Durham, Connecticut, because she saw a red Corvette and always, in that town next door we lived. Well, then she became 5, and one night she wanted to watch a movie, and I said, okay, well, why don't we watch Cars? We haven't seen that for, a while, several years, and that was, you love that movie. It was your favorite movie. And she looked at me like I was nuts. Like, no, I've never heard of that movie. I've never seen it before. And she really had no memory of ever seeing it before. And she's telling me this sitting in that same Lightning McQueen chair, that she's never heard of this movie. And we watch it, and she really was like she was watching it for the first time. It was like, surprised at all the plot twists. She was laughing at the right places, but as if she'd never seen the movie before. And she thought I was crazy because I'd said that she had just no memory at all of those years of her life. Well, why is that important? Because there's a lot of things that do happen early in our life that do matter to the rest of our life, and we have no idea that they're influencing us. And for one thing, research out of Minnesota has tracked these people who are now in their 20s, but when they were 1 year old, they came into the lab with their mother, and they took what's called the Strange test. The Strange test is a way to measure how attached the child is to the parent. And usually, back in the day, it was always the mother, but now it's both parents. And there are kids, who are attached. Mother leaves the room. They're like not bothered because they know if there's any problem, mother will be right back. They can count on that. Mother has their back. But others, they don't know that. And so when the mother leaves, they're a mess. They cry. They're hysterical because they know the mother may not be coming back very soon or may not come in if they're yelling and crying for them. So they can't trust that. So it was a matter of bonding and trust. Is it there at age 1 or not? Then they look at these people age 6, 7 in elementary school, high school, then in their 20s. If they're securely attached, they have more friends in grade school. They're happier and have better grades in high school, and they have relationships that do not break up very often in their 20s. The opposite is true of the people who have insecure relationships at age 1 with their mother. So if something is happening early in your life, it's affecting your relationships with people. Can you trust people? Do you break up with them easily or not the rest of your life? And they're tracking these people now. They will continue to track them as they go through their life. But that's totally opaque to you because you have no memory of any of that. There's things that happen in the present too that go beyond what's really out there. For example, we really think we know people from their face. We really think that their face is diagnostic. Somehow we really know that person. Grumpy cat, right? It's a cat. It's a cat. That's not really grumpy, right? I mean, it's not grumpy. It looks grumpy. You think it's grumpy? No, it's a cat. It's not really grumpy, but boy, it looks grumpy, right? And that's Old Man Marley from Home Alone, probably before your time, but this is a 1990s movie, right? Old Man Marley was like an axe murderer in the basement, his body's in the basement next door, according to the kids in the neighborhood, but turned out to be this sweet old guy. There's that scene at the end of Christmas, and he reunites with his granddaughter, and it's all wonderful. But he's a sweet old guy. He just looks like, some axe murderer. But we really feel so sure of ourselves when we see a person's face, like we really know their personality. Turns out that's not diagnostic. People are elected as senators and governors who have the most trustworthy face. People rate those faces not knowing who they are. And it turns out the one who was rated most trustworthy and competent tends to win these elections 70% of the time. So certainly the people voting are thinking they know this person's competent or trustworthy, and the face by itself is not diagnostic. What is diagnostic is if you see the person in action. If you see a person even for 15 seconds, 30 seconds interacting with other people, that does predict very well their outcomes. Are they a good therapist? Are they a good teacher? Are they a good whatever? But not photographs, and not just seeing a person for the first time without any kind of interaction or seeing them in action at all. Here's another way we go beyond. We have herds of antelope, schools of fish, flocks of bird, all doing the same thing, same time. Fred Bird is not looking around seeing Susie Bird go one way and say, I think I'll do the same thing. It's not a matter of making decisions here. It's just an automatic kind of response to do the same thing as the conspecifics around you. And cats, I'm not so sure. I mean, this needs to be replicated, but we do. People do. People definitely do this. Little kids really imitate, especially around age 2, age 3. They're learning what it is right to do. They don't know. And so they're really watching everybody to see, and they'll do what you're doing, and they'll do it over and over and over again. So we've studied this and shown that effect in the lab with college students. Physical behaviors like holding your ear, tucking your ear, or shaking your foot, that kind of thing. You're more likely to do it when you're with a person doing the same thing, and you switch people, and you do what, so it's like a chameleon changing the spots to match the environment, the social environment they're in. Okay. But this has consequences. This is a Dutch field study showing that antisocial behavior, mild, littering, graffiti, taking a shopping cart 3 blocks to your car instead of not leaving it in the parking lot, those kinds of mild antisocial behaviors are contagious in that in an area that has no graffiti, these leaflets that are put on the handlebars of the bike by rubber bands are not littered as much as they are on the right. They put these on, and if there's graffiti and that kind of thing, there's much more littering, throwing them on the ground instead of throwing them away. And the various demonstrations. This paper came out in Science about 10 years ago. There's social network analysis, Nick Christakis and Jim Fowler, looking at social networks like alumni associations or work groups, credit union members, this kind of thing. And in that network, who knows who, things like obesity, depression, cooperation, happiness, and other things spread so that if there's a person 2 or 3 people removed from you, and you don't even know them, but they know somebody you know and that kind of thing, you're much more likely to have the same characteristics as they are. So things like that spread. Behavior spreads, mood spread, behavior types like cooperation spread. That's contagion. Probably heard of this one, the Facebook study from 2014, where 700,000 users had their newsfeed deliberately manipulated as an experiment to be 20% more positive or 20% more negative than usual. And then they looked to see that user's own posts up to 3 or 4 days later to see if they were also more positive or more negative, and they were. So you manipulate the newsfeed, it actually caused the person themselves to have more positive or more negative mood in their posts. That's another kind of, obviously, social network you get this kind of spread. What you see is what you do, unfortunately, is used by advertisers. This is an epidemiological study coming out of Northeastern University, just published last year. About 1,000 underage drinkers, 13 to 19 years old. The more alcohol ads they watched on TV, the more they drank. You see these a lot. Parents often watch NFL football games or other sporting events. You see beer ads, you see Captain Morgan, you see alcohol ads a lot. The more of these ads the kids were exposed to, the more they drank. And this goes from an average of 10 drinks a month to 30 drinks a month for those who watched a lot of ads. It's a direct effect of the ad content. We've done studies just looking at 5-minute comedy clips, the old show, Whose Line Is It Anyway, with Drew Carey. We have a food ad in there in the break, or a non-food ad in there in the break. We have a bowl of goldfish crackers next to them. And the people who saw the food ad, it wasn't even about that kind of food, ate 45% more of the goldfish crackers. The food ads are trying to get you to eat at home when you're watching TV, so that you'll eat more then and have to buy more the next day at the store. They're trying to get you to consume more. Here they're trying to get you to drink more, or at least that is the outcome, whether or not they are deliberately trying to do that, and the effect happens to teenage drinkers too. Nice thing about this mimicry is that it actually causes bonding, liking, and feeling that the interaction went more smoothly. We have these things where people do the same thing at the same time in our culture. Religious rituals where you stand, you kneel, you sing hymns, you all do it at the same time. Military, you march in step, you say things together in unison. This actually does produce greater bonding and liking for the group and the group effort. These are field studies. This is Dutch restaurant. And the waitress, all the waitress or waiter did in this study was to repeat back the customer's order right afterwards. So I like a hamburger, milkshake, and some fries, please. And then the waitress would say, you'd like a hamburger, milkshake, and fries? Just repeat back the order. Or not. If she repeated back the order, the tips are on the right there, significantly more tips at the end than otherwise. This is a French department store. Electronics part of a French department store, large French department store, and MP3 players here, the same thing. They repeated back what the customer said when I'd like a look at an MP3 player for my grandson. He's turning 13 next week. Oh, you like an MP3 player for your grandson? He's turning 13 next week. Or not, right? Or just, okay, here's the MP3 players. Sales went from 63 to 87% in the mimicry condition, and customer satisfaction with the store and the clerk was markedly higher. They went out to the parking lot and asked those kinds of questions afterwards. So real-life consequences. Now, the other thing about the present is the context changes you. You can be a different person at home as you are at work. My sister was actually at the talk I gave in San Francisco the other day, and we were looking at each other like, this is not our mother, is it? No. Yeah, it is. This is our mother. So you can be a different person in different places, right? Well, Ernst Fehr, who's a professor in economics at the University of Zurich, has actually been tipped to win a Nobel Prize in economics. One day soon, you might hear his name again, has done studies looking at investment bankers. Big thing in Zurich, right? So investment bankers might be different people at work than they are at home. What he did was to get them at home on a weekend. And he had them play a coin toss game where every heads that they toss, they get 20 Swiss francs. So I think there were 20 coin flips, so you can win up to 400 if you get magically all 20 heads. You were the one who reported what you got. So no one would know you're at home. You can say you got 20 if you know that. No one would know the difference, right? But on average, you're going to get 10 out of 20 heads on the average. What he did in this study was to get them at home, but for some of them, he had them describe their workplace, what their office was like. So he got them thinking about their office right before this game. In the other condition, they did not do that. It's the same people randomly assigned to be the office or the home condition, and you probably can't see this, but on the left, these are the home people. They were not asked to think about their office. And you get pretty much the binomial distribution, which means this is what you'd expect by chance. You get some people on the low end, you get some people on the high end, but most people are right there, 4, 5, or 6 in the middle, or whatever it is, the average. The people on the right are the people who thought about their workplace. It's shifted significantly to the right. You even get this guy saying, oh yeah, I got like all heads, or you got a lot of heads over there. And they're greedier, they're less moral, they're less honest. The same people randomly assigned if they just thought about their office in this mundane kind of way before the task. And he's talking about situated identities, that you might be a different person at home, different values and different behaviors than you are at your workplace. And unfortunately, this actually affects kids. This is a study that at the time was shocking. It came out of Harvard about 2004 or 5. Asian American girls, and they had them color in a cartoon with crayons that either emphasized their Asian identity or their girl identity, with Asian themes or with girls playing with dolls. Now, the stereotype of the culture is Asian Americans are better at math and science than everybody else, than the average person, but girls are not. Girls are worse at math and science than everybody else. So if they had colored in the Asian themes, then they took a math test. Their math test was significantly higher than the average of the group. If they had just colored in the girl ones, their average was significantly lower than average of the group. Now remember, they're randomly assigned, these are the same kids, randomly assigned to be in the Asian or the girl condition. The stereotypes of the culture about the qualities or the capabilities of groups has already gotten into their head at age 5 and influencing their actual performance on a math test. They are a different person depending on which aspect of their identity has been made presently salient. So the future, to wrap up, the future, your goals change what you think are good or bad things, the health risk you're willing to take, who you consider to be your best friends, and so forth and so on. There's lots of stuff. I mean, for me, the feeling of a goal and a motive is strong when I'm playing these dumb game apps on my phone and like Candy Crush, and I'm like trying to beat this level for weeks, and I'm just almost there. And the in-app purchase, right? These games are free, but the in-app purchase, right? The in-app purchase, for $5 you can get 5 extra moves. Like, yeah, 5 extra moves. Yeah. So you beat this level, yay, and you move on. And then of course you get the bill, Apple Light, whatever, $5.99. Like, oh my God. It's like, what was this stupid game on my phone? Who cares? No one's going to know. There's no trophy given out in recognition of winning Candy Crush. I mean, But at the time, the goal is so close, and you almost are there, and the feeling is very strong if you really are into this game and are trying to beat all the levels, that kind of thing. So your goal changes what you think is a good or bad thing to do. In a more important way, these are, again, a Dutch grocery store, reminded at the beginning with a recipe flyer with words related to healthy eating or dieting. And these are obese shoppers or non-obese shoppers. For the non-obese shoppers, these primes and the recipe flyers do not make any difference on their purchases. But for the people who presumably more likely to have a dieting goal and an eating healthy goal, these words and recipe flyers actually change how much unhealthy snack food they buy from 4 and 20 euros to 1 and 80 euros. And they have no memory of the recipe flyer, what was in it, and have any idea that influenced them at all. What they did was activate the goal they had for diet and healthy eating and actually change their purchases when they looked at the receipts at the end. Same thing, this is a University of Minnesota study with undergraduate women who say they don't think diet pills and tanning salons are a good idea. They are health risks and they're dangerous. But if they just looked on Tinder and other kind of dating sites and were asked to rate the attractiveness of both men and women on the site, activating like we want to call it a mating goal or the idea of finding a mate and partner or sex, whatever you want to call it. Now they do these ratings and then suddenly they're fine with tanning salons and diet pills and don't think they're risky at all. They don't think they'd hurt them at all. And so the same people are changed by the fact that they've got this goal. Being attractive is good for that goal. It may not be good for you and it may not reflect your chronic or long-term values, but temporarily you think it's a good idea. So it's changed you. As I said, these things operate in the background. They can work on problems that you have and you maybe even forgot about what it was. You're trying to remember something, you know it, but you can't remember it, and you just try to remember it. And later on, you're doing something completely different 3 or 4 hours later, and the answer pops into your head out of the blue. But it was because unconsciously you were still trying to solve that problem in the background. You have the goal to solve it, you really want to solve it, and you trying to figure out that answer, and you get it later when you're thinking about something else. Sherlock Holmes did this all the time. I've read all the novels and the complete short stories over and over again. When Sherlock Holmes comes to a impasse and can't make progress on some crime or something he's trying to solve, he takes a break. He plays the violin, he takes cocaine, he does something else. And he comes back and his mind's refreshed and he has insights and he has breakthroughs, right? He thinks as he's refreshed his mind, what's really going on is while his conscious mind has been elsewhere, unconscious processes continue to work on that problem and sometimes can do a better job than we can do consciously for reasons explained in the book, but reasons for unconscious kinds of processes being better, processing information in parallel and better for complex decisions and complex problems sometimes than more limited, focused, conscious thinking. Sometimes they come to you when you're doing something else, like Eureka in the bathtub, burning naked. This is a G-rated version, but he actually was naked, according to historians of the time. Ran naked through the streets of Syracuse after discovering the principle that he was working on in a public bath. And there have been dreams, the benzene ring theory. Kekulé came up with a benzene ring theory in a dream of snakes eating each other's tails in a fiery kind of circle. I had my own alligator dream that's described in the book, but it's the same kind of experience where it's just, you know the answer, you've been working on something for 5 or 10 years, and it comes to you in this kind of dream work, which is actually another way of this problem is being worked on when you're not actually consciously thinking about it, if it's a very important problem as it was to both Kekulé and myself. So people have worried about these things in terms of mind control, and whether people can use these kinds of influences on people to get them to do things that they maybe didn't want to do on their own. And so, we do need to think about and talk about that because it is something that is legitimate to worry about. But just briefly, and that's where I'm going to wrap up. Economist Magazine worries about mind control, has issues about that. In the past, there have been little books like Communism, Hypnotism, and the Beatles. This is actually a book that came out in 1970 or so, that the Beatles were trying to hypnotize us and make us communists through their evil beat. You can get these on eBay, aluminum foil deflector beanies that prevent aliens from outer space from sending rays that influence your mind. And of course, the sex and the ice cube stuff. There's still books on their subliminal seduction that had this kind of worry that that's what's going on in these kind of ads. And this is actually a subliminal ad that was played widely during the Bush-Gore campaign in 2000. This is an actual ad from the Bush campaign that it was discovered actually subliminally put the word rats right before the word Democrats appeared in September of 2000, trying to emphasize the rats part of Democrats. And they denied that they meant to do this and this kind of stuff. And George W., Bush 43, kept denying this for weeks afterwards, saying they don't engage in this subliminal advertising over and over again. But they were. So, those things you don't really have to worry about. These on the left are really true. They really are influencing us outside of our awareness, and they are influences that if we know about them, we can do something about them, and we can actually use them to our advantage. We can turn them around and have them help us to get done what we want and help us do the right thing that we want to do and that kind of thing once we know all about them. But, some people are insisting that they're the captain of their soul and the captain of their ship, and none of these things ever, everything influences me, I'm aware of and I intend, and nothing else really influences me. But the really good ship captains are the ones who take the current and the wind into account. They don't just aim their ship at the port and say that's all that matters. The current and the winds don't matter at all, because if they do that, this happens. You get crashed in the rocks or carried out to sea. You can play golf that way. You can aim right at the hole. In fact, the wind doesn't matter and whatever, and this is what happens to you then. So, it's your choice. Everyone has the ability to make that choice on their own. But really, the point is, we all have control over these things because they're really not secret anymore. And once you know about them, it's up to you what you want to do with them. But I want to thank you all for coming and for listening today.
But how could we apply some of these techniques, if I'm trying to lose weight, how could we apply some of these techniques to that, for example?
So this is really recent stuff, the last 5 or 6 years. It's not my area, but I read the research. And every researcher now, 5, 6, 7 of the major researchers in the area of self-control and self-regulation, right, are saying the people who are effective self-regulators, who score high on those scales, people who are good self-control people, and self-regulators make more money than anybody, the rest of us. They are happier, they have better relationships, they're healthier, all those good things comes with these people who are high in this ability to self-regulate and self-control. How do they do it? Well, the old model is by acts of will. They have such a strong will, and the rest of us are just weak-willed little wimps, and we can't do the things they can do with their strong will. It's actually the opposite of that. They don't use willpower. Willpower is hard to do, and it's always a struggle. What they do is they set up their world to make it easy for them to do the things they want to do. They set up their environment in a way that they don't have the tempting things that they could eat or drink at home. They don't buy those things in the first place. They set up the good things they want to do. They make good habits out of them and make routines out of them. They start by saying, okay, I want to exercise, I want to go running. They come home, they get out of their work clothes, and they immediately put on their running shorts and running shoes. Because what else are you going to do after you put on your running shoes and your running stuff but go run? And they make that so that they do it without even thinking. They come home, they change, they put that on, and without having to use any willpower at all. So the effective self-control and self-regulator people are making use of the unconscious kinds of influences of habit and routine and setting up their world. If they want to be kinder and helpful, they'll put a photograph of the people they want to be kind and help to in their life, like their grandmother. They always are kind and helpful to their grandmother. They might have a picture of her on their desk as a reminder without thinking about it to be that way. Or whatever it is, high achievement, whatever it is. You make your world to have those cues come in from the outside that trigger these tendencies that you want to support and build your world so that the outside world supports it instead of tears those things down. And that's what they do. So that would apply to losing weight, it would apply to exercising, it would apply to pretty much anything you want to do.
Thanks for the talk. So should our final goal be really to tame and undecipher unconsciousness as much as we can so that we can cope with unconsciousness better? Or is there some level in which having some level of unconsciousness is actually a healthy thing and you should just let it be in the end?
Yeah, this is the hardest chapter of this book to write for me was a chapter called When Can You Trust Your Gut? Because in the past we've had books like Blink, right, bestsellers, that say, trust your gut. And other books like Thinking Fast and Slow that say, don't trust your gut. And they're both sitting there in paperback in the stores right next to each other, right? And they say the opposite thing. So it's a little more nuanced than that. It's a little more difficult question than that. You pretty much can trust your gut and you can trust unconscious influences in certain situations and not in others. One rule is if it's your preference and kinds of things you like or dislike, your first kind of reactions usually are the best, and you can overthink your feelings and get something different because of that and not be as happy with that choice if you overthink it. You can trust your gut about other people that you're meeting as long as you see them in action. If you see just the face or their characteristics like skin color or age and so forth, then you can be very wrong. But if you see them in action, usually we're pretty good about that. So the one thing, the rule for other people is to always give people a chance. Don't judge them just on the way they look or what you think, because it's very powerful. Studies in courtrooms, for example, have found that baby-faced individuals have more of a childlike face, get lower sentences, are less likely to be found guilty for the same crimes as people who aren't baby-faced. And unfortunately, people of color, the darker the color, the longer the sentence they get for the same crime. And this is going on right now. This isn't something in the past. So these things really matter to real outcomes. And unfortunately, people like judges and people in the legal system deny this stuff happens. They don't, no, that's not an influence. I just tell my jury not to be influenced by those things. Really, that's what actual trial judges say to people who point out this kind of evidence. So they just, So when can you trust unconsciousness? I'll tell you one thing I heard from somebody, other people say the same kind of thing. I was on the Channel 5 morning show this morning, and somebody in the audience said the same thing that I'm going to say now. I would give myself assignments, basically, when I'd finish. I wrote this book basically last year in 6 months. I had been trying to write it for 4 years, but it finally clicked, and I finally was able, amazing, almost a chapter a week. It just was coming out of me. And what was going on, after I finished a chapter, you think, oh, good, I finished a chapter, relax, have fun for a while, and then start the next one tomorrow. But before I would do that, I'd always get the next chapter in my head. I'd always take the next day's stuff and start looking at it and getting it all up here, and then go have fun. And then go relax, be with my daughter, go shopping, do the chores, whatever I needed to do. But I'd always get the next thing in my head first. So I'd be working on it without, unconsciously basically. And boy, it was great. You'd come back the next day and I'd have ideas about how to organize it and put it all together and get going right away. Much better than if you leave it and start cold the next morning. So those are the things you kind of use. One other thing, this is my favorite little tip, like life hack kind of thing out of this, is this thing about bonding and imitation. You can use that. It's so easy because we naturally imitate and mimic each other without trying to. You don't want to try to. All you need to do is look at the other person. So if you're meeting somebody, a new colleague, a new work, somebody, a new neighbor just moved in, a new friend, anything like that, just look at them while you're interacting for the first time. You will naturally, because you're just looking at them, imitate what they do. That will naturally cause them to bond and like with you more than if you hadn't done that. And the trick is just to look at them. And turns out that on empathy scales, people who have a personality that's higher empathic than other people, they also are the people who look more and perceive more at the other person while they're interacting. And it's a real easy thing to do, and it has all these potentially good benefits. And you're just letting this sort of unconscious mechanism operate on its own naturally.
When you say that things like cooperation and obesity can have effects 2 or 3 degrees from your social network, how do you know what's cause and what's effector? Like, how do you know it's not the case that, say, obese people tend to be more friends with each other than otherwise?
You can't. These are correlational studies. The social network analysis in sociology is correlational. The Facebook study was actually experimental because they manipulated the news feed and showed that even the earlier Facebook studies showing contagion were correlational. That's why Kramer did this second study. The first one showed the contagion, but said, well, the objection was just what you said. And then say, okay, you experimentally manipulate it. It was very controversial because you're playing around with people's moods, right? And it's in the end agreement. What do you call those things? It's like on page 5004 that it's okay to do that, and no one ever reads those, right? So they said it was okay because the people using Facebook agreed to this because it's in the agreement. But then they did the experimental version and showed the same effect. So you're absolutely right. In the sociological social network, the reason I put that up there, it's a new method that shows it actually happening. It does not give a conclusive answer about the cause. The other studies like ours, when we manipulate what people do and show the same effect, that helps make you feel better about the causal nature of it. You have to do both, though. You have to do both kinds of studies.
So is the mimicry why everyone likes parrots as a pet bird?
I got a good parrot joke.
My real question is, so at Google we have a lot of training programs around trying to tackle unconscious biases, and in fact, in the promotion committee processes, we have everyone's required to go through the unconscious bias training prior to actually serving on a promotion committee. I was just wondering, in the broader industry, in other corporations, other organization settings, have you looked into research around unconscious bias training and trying to steer the effects that these biases have among?
No, that is a cottage industry that's outside of academia, basically. I remember there was I look at Tumblr sometimes, and I have a little dumb, nature picture thing on Tumblr with 3 followers, and since I'm on there, like a few Fridays ago, maybe 3 or 4 Fridays ago, it was an open question and answer on unconscious bias, and those people who were answering the questions, I don't know any of them, and I haven't heard, but they're all in the private sector, they're in industry. So I don't really know what the kind of training. I know that they do talk about the Harvard implicit IAT kinds of tests that you can take to detect the fact that you might have some unconscious bias. It's a much simpler version than what I'm talking about in the book because the unconscious bias they measure is just good or bad. It's just, do you have a positive or negative association with these groups? And that can be misattributed. So the idea, this would fall into the present section of the book, that you have a negative feeling towards a member of a different social group. And that negative feeling, you don't know the real source of it because it's this unconscious kind of source. And then you usually attribute it to something that makes plausible sense. Oh, they didn't have such good letters of recommendation, or they didn't come from a very good school, or you somehow explain it in terms of something that may be plausible. So that's a real danger. It's that even well-meaning and well-intentioned people, egalitarian people, fall prey to this misattribution effect because they have the negative feeling, not knowing what the source is, and then apply it to something that is plausible, that they can say, oh, I didn't like this or that, and makes sense. It's not their skin color, it's not their gender, But there's so many demonstrations. I mean, in the book, talk about this new Italian study, which is horrible. This is 11,000 job applications, actual jobs postings in Italy. And what they did was they made up an identical set of resumes, so the identical qualifications, education, everything is identical. They either made it a male or a female applicant by the name, and they put either an attractive or an unattractive photograph along with the application. And they sent all four to all the 11,000 jobs in Italy, and these were actual jobs. They wanted to see who got called back for an interview. Among the women, 57% of the attractive women got called in for an interview, 7% of the unattractive women got called in for an interview. Now, you may say, well, they're just intentionally trying to hire the attractive women. And you talk to the people, and no, that's not what we're trying to do. That would be illegal. They don't want to do that. They say they don't. And yet they have this bias called the beauty premium that's huge. I mean, 57 to 7. For men, it's 47 to 25. I mean, it's bad for men too, but for women, it's gigantic. And these are, people who are not given the same economic opportunities because of these kinds of biases. So in real life right now, not back in the past, these things really are a problem. And they have to do with biases that people aren't aware of. But now we should know more about these biases, and we should be able to take steps to stop them. Like not having photographs on applications, for one thing, right? And I know in orchestras, the tryouts are behind a curtain. You don't know the age, you don't know the gender, you don't know the race, the ethnicity, whatever you want to call it, of the person behind the curtain. You can only hear the music. If we could do that, and that's easy to do for orchestras, right? It's not as easy to do in other areas, but removing those kinds of cues that the culture gives us that says this group can do this group can't do that. We get from the culture, and it soaks into all of us. Even if we are well-meaning and well-intentioned and egalitarian people, it's still in our heads. We get rid of those cues, we'd be a lot better off. We could do a lot more. Now, I don't know if that's what they do. See, I don't know the training and what they're about, but that would be my answer or my solution or what I would suggest based on the research.
What we do here is it depends on if you're taking the online version of the training or if you're doing the in-person training sessions. But the in-person training sessions try to really focus on trying to incite these biases, trigger these biases that someone might not realize that they have, and so then you can reflect on realizing that you had that bias that you didn't.
Because I so strongly, this is why I went into my field partly, and I teach this to my Yale undergraduates and everything, and I get some students walking out of the room talking about these kinds of things, about privilege and stuff like that. But here's what I would say, because I've got you right now, and I'm going to say this. The last chapter of the book, and I'll give it to you for free right now, what I'm saying is not my own research, but it's a way to combat these things that actually works. They're called implementation intentions, and it's my colleague Peter Goldwitzer at NYU. The idea is this: when I see a person of color, I will be fair. And what you're doing is you're specifying the trigger out there that will cause the idea of fairness immediately to happen. You link your intention to the future state of affairs. When I see a person of color, which is going to happen, I will be fair. And you really have to commit yourself to that. It's not a magic trick that if you don't really, I don't really care, but I'll say it, magic. It's not a magic spell. You have to be really committed in the first place, but you want to do that. You can say that, and actually it works. And that works for lots of things. When X happens, in a reliable future event that always happens, I will do Y. When X happens, I will do Y. And that kind of thing helps the elderly take medications when they got 5 different kinds of pills at different times a day, with food or without food, all this kind of complicated stuff. It helps them do that. It helps health psychology has used this. Political people have used this to increase voter turnout in primary elections. Because they say at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, I will take a break from work, I will drive to the polling place, and you specify the when, where, and how of you're going to carry out your intention instead of I'm just going to vote. You make a concrete plan when, where, and how I'm going to do it. And that really helps. So if there can be if I encounter a person of color, I will be fair, that simple kind of thing. And they've actually done studies showing that actually does make people more fair in treatment. So maybe that'll work.
So I've been told I have the honor of asking the last question. And earlier you mentioned the experiment where if people were exposed to a warm environment, they were more prone to social warmth, and if they were exposed to cold, they did the opposite. Do you know if that is a function of people using the exact same word warm to refer to these two very different things? Or versus like social warmth and actual physical warmth, as opposed to if
Thank you for asking that. It's the reason why we use the word warm for both. And there's lots like George Lakoff, right, at Berkeley has written all about metaphors we live by and all these different metaphors. We tend to appropriate physical language terms to talk about our relationship with people. It's almost like there's no psychology separate language, it's all physical. So we talk about a distant father, or a close relationship, or high status. These are all physical direction, kinds of terms. A warm friend, a cold friend, a cold boss, something like that. So why are we using all these physical terms? Because it turns out, these are researchers who look at child language development, it turns out these are the first experiences that children have, and they're direct experiences. They're the first concept infants form and kids, toddlers form, are these warm, cold, high, low, close and far kinds of terms. Rough, smooth. And so then when we develop understandings of people, we tend to use that vocabulary. And so we talk about a hard negotiator or soft on crime, which means when we're yielding, it's a physical term all the time, and we all know what each other means too. We can communicate using these terms. The thing about the warm, I just want to say, how many of you are parents or going to be parents? But this channel of warmth, the physical warmth, signaling to the infant that you can trust, that the infant can trust whoever they're with, is gigantic. It's been there since time immemorial, and it's a way that, now my wife used to work in a hospital. She says, now that they have the father open the shirt and put the baby on the father's chest, not just the mother breastfeeding, because they want the father to also bond with the child. And they say, this is the skin-on-skin contact. It may not be the skin-on-skin as much as the warmth. Because to the baby who doesn't know anything, the feeling of warmth is an ancient sign that you can be trusted. And it's this channel that works all the way through our life. It's still there as adults. But it's hugely important for the infant who doesn't know who to trust, is totally helpless, is dependent on everybody around them to keep them fed and warm and have something to drink and shelter, protected from predators. And it's that channel. So I knew this going in with my daughter. I hugged and hugged and hugged and hugged and hugged to make sure she was as securely attached by age 1 at least as possible. I was basically a single parent raising this little girl. And knowing that it would affect her the rest of her life. It would affect her friendships in grade school, how long her relationships lasted in her 20s. And if I could just invest, even though it's so exhausting, with little babies and toddlers, invest as much of my time to do that for her early on, it would pay off for her forever. And we can all do that. But that channel is there, and it can be used. It seems irrational. It seems silly. Why would warm, But to the little know-nothing baby, it matters everything.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question.